Welcome to Ordinary Teachers and Students, where we get to hear teachers and students tell us their extraordinary stories. My hope is that through this podcast, ordinary teachers from around the world can relate to the stories they hear and get some timely suggestions and ideas. My name is Alan Cheng, and I'm a secondary school teacher in the UK, a life coach, and a former university lecturer. My mission is to make the education system a better place for all. Today, I'm delighted to invite Simone Homen onto our podcast. Simone was a teacher for 28 years, teaching in 3 Canadian provinces in urban and rural settings. She taught a variety of curricula from grades 5 to 12, and her subject expertise was at the high school level in English and in history. Simone has a deeply spiritual connection to teaching, and she has the ability to see into the soul of every single student that she's ever taught in her career. This ability has enabled her to create safe and loving connections with her students. When her students felt safe, seen, heard, and understood, no matter where they were at, their brains were able to engage in real, messy learning. I'm very excited to speak to Simone today, so let's welcome Simone. Hi, Simone.
Hi, nice to meet you, Alan, and thank you for inviting me onto your podcast.
Sure. Anything that you want to add to that intro? So obviously there's a lot there. Anything that you wanted to maybe elaborate a little bit on?
Just the fact that I think I was born a teacher. It's my calling, it's my passion. So it's just something that is so deeply part of my everyday life
Yeah.
in all facets. So that's
Sure.
really it. Yeah.
I mean, let's start there then. So when you say you were born a teacher, does that mean that when you were a child, you were already playing kind of teaching with your dolls
Yeah.
and toys?
Yeah, like you hear those stories, absolutely. And just also I just vividly remember being a child and really paying attention to how people learn, and it's so strange because I can even remember being 5 years old in kindergarten because I was born my family's German, and so I was born in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and we just spoke German at home. So I didn't actually
Oh.
learn how to speak English until I went to kindergarten. So I sometimes wonder upon reflection if that really prompted me to pay attention to learning because I had to pay attention to nonverbal cues. Like now, I obviously didn't know
Yeah.
those words. I do know that
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
but nonverbal cues, and then just watching how certain people or certain kids, students mastered different subjects, right? And how did they do that? So I've just always been deeply observant, paying attention to how people learn. And obviously now, with all the brain research that exists in our, and all the advancements and understanding about learning, it sort of makes a lot more sense to me. But my young
Yeah.
self was already very interested in how people like obtain knowledge and learn,
Very
right?
interesting. Did you also
Yeah.
notice whether being bilingual, like, well, I guess you were monolingual originally, right, with German, but
Right.
then I'm sure you picked up English quite quickly. But do you think that helped you with language learning in general?
Absolutely, because it's funny because my passion, I've been a history and an English teacher. I have a passion for history, but I have a passion for language and learning and words and and the passion also really stems down to like what does a word mean, right? Like the definition of it, because students, like as a teacher, it's always like when you're looking at your own self-reflective practices and you're like reflecting on what went well, what was misunderstood. And it's so
Yeah.
fascinating how so much of it comes down to the meaning of a word or context of a word and just that constant clarification that needs to occur to be like, oh, well, I thought it was clear when I said so and so. And other students are like, so I think that, yeah, I think that being bilingual has had an
Yeah.
impact on, yeah, on
Yeah,
language and learning for me, for
that's really
sure.
interesting. Yeah. And so when we think about your decision to become a teacher finally, was it quite a straightforward one? Was it kind of like when you were getting towards the end of high school, choosing college
Yeah.
degrees and things like that, were you already set, or was there kind of also a dilemma between teaching and other careers?
Okay, so I can tell you for a fact, I've always 100% in my soul wanted to be a teacher. But what was interesting is the societal context for me.
Mm,
So I was privileged enough to grow up in a middle class, upper class neighborhood in Calgary.
yeah.
And everybody that I was surrounded with, going on to explore what they were going to do with their
Mm,
futures, and just the vision that perhaps my mother had for me was not one of teaching, because at that
mm,
time, it was a real kind of undercurrent, or like understanding in that kind of world
mm,
that,
mm.
oh, you're just going to be a teacher. That's
Yeah.
it.
Mm,
Oh,
mm,
the teachers don't make very much money. Like teachers
mm,
really,
mm.
and like, and I often, ironically, in the 80s heard, yeah, well, only the deadbeats become teachers. Like
Oh,
if
that
you were a
hurts. Mm.
physicist, you would be a physicist, but you're not. So now you're going to be a physics teacher,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it really is interesting, because no, I actually did not go to university to become a teacher at first,
Ah, right.
because I felt so swayed by,
Mm,
family or popular societal opinion. And then it just unraveled. And I was like, forget it. This is all I want to do. That's all I care about.
mm,
So
mm.
then I had to find my own voice, right? And be
Yep.
confident, and find some self-worth, and really struggle and fight against some forces. And yeah, and then I went into it, and it's just been a natural fit ever since. Like
Mm,
it's what
mm,
it
mm, mm.
is.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. I'm just curious which area you went into. That you like you
Oh,
said you didn't go
for
into
teaching, you
teaching
mean?
instead
Yeah.
of
Well,
teaching. Mm,
my first year I went to Carleton University in Ottawa for
mm,
journalism, because I thought I
mm,
wanted to be
mm,
the next, like, Barbara Walters or Dan
mm,
Rather, because I loved their presence on TV. And then
mm,
I went into that program, and I quickly learned how, oh, only 7% of people in journalism make it to the top. And then
mm,
all the stuff below it, I'm like, I can't do this. And then it really became an ethical choice for me, because I remember vividly in one of my classes, it was a case study about, okay, so there's been a fire,
mm,
and you need to be the first one on the scene, because it was called beats at the time. You got to hit the
mm,
beat or whatever. Um, and so you're going to interview the father whose wife and kids just died in a fire.
mm,
I was
mm,
like, I can't do this. Ethically,
mm,
I'm
mm.
so like into humanity, and
Yeah,
so into
yeah.
human progress. I was like, I can't do that. There's no way that I can go. And then obviously, as time has gone on and we look at what media has evolved into, like I
Mm,
just, these are not things that are authentically important to me, in terms
mm.
of, I guess taking advantage of people's pain,
Yeah, yeah. I know what I
for
mean. Yeah.
news, to get the news. Like I just, for me, I couldn't do it. And so that really fascinatingly was where I really learned my courage to say,
Mm.
no, I'm going to be a teacher. So
Brilliant,
yeah,
brilliant. Very nice to
yeah,
hear that. And so you said it's been 28 years. Were
yes.
there times where you wanted to quit? So like where
Oof.
you're like, actually teaching is what I expected.
Well, ironically, now I have quit. Is
Mm,
that
mm,
I have never felt like I wanted to quit. Hard things do not scare me.
mm,
But I will say that I think that just the education system that I left in Saskatchewan, it was extremely hard for me to be part of a system where we are not honoring the true authenticity of our students. And
mm,
I'm sure
mm,
and I look at where I come from, it's like a microcosm, I believe, of
mm.
the world and the education systems of the world, because I do read a lot about education systems around the world, and I have
Yep.
contacts around the world, and I talk to people. And I just know that I can say in North America that our education systems were designed on, like, John D. Rockefeller's vision of, I want a nation of workers. I don't want a
Mm,
nation of
mm,
thinkers. And oh my gosh, the gifts that I see in students, they're unbelievable. And I'm watching so many students retreat into anxiety
mm,
and depression. And I
mm,
know there's so many societal factors that contribute to that. But with the lack of funding in public education, and
mm,
this idea of, creating these workers, the education system no longer, and it hasn't for a long time, but
Mm,
it does not match
mm,
where we need to be with our, like where we are in the 21st century.
right.
So yeah, so I have quit. I just quit this year, actually. I just
Mm,
can't
mm,
do it anymore. And so I'm trying to explore ways to be of service to humanity.
yeah.
Um, and ultimately to students, because I so deeply in my heart believe that
Mm,
kids are our future. And we say that, and students come first, kids are our future, but I don't see the truth in that
mm,
yet, yet, yet.
So it's not reflected in the actions that
No.
policies are
So,
made.
and so I just feel that I can no longer contribute to that. I've used my voice. I've
Yeah,
certainly been passionate about trying to make changes. I've been an informal leader my entire life. I've
yeah.
purposefully avoided formal leadership. I've been asked many times,
Mm-hmm,
to be in administration, but I just can't be a puppet or a cog
mm,
in this
mm,
wheel that
absolutely.
does not reflect the true connection between students'
Mm,
growth and learning.
mm. So you said that you've quit this year, and so have you missed
Mm.
it? Like just that,
I miss the students, and
yeah.
I've been lucky because, okay, so I've just students who've graduated,
Mm,
because I've like, in terms of social media and students, I've never connected with them over social media.
mm,
But then COVID hit, and then we
mm,
gave out our numbers and our
mm,
email addresses
mm,
because we,
mm,
really had to connect and
mm,
with
mm,
students, at their mental health and their learning. So I have been lucky. I have so many students who keep in touch
mm.
with me. And
Oh,
so I value the connections with,
mm,
like, students, and I've had so many over the years that keep in touch with me,
mm,
and I'm
mm.
delighted to see their progress, and how they're fumbling and stumbling and learning through life.
Oh yeah,
So, but
absolutely.
yes, but
Yeah.
I do miss the teaching part. I do. I'm not, so I
Mm,
haven't figured this out yet perfectly, but
mm.
it's not over yet. It's not over yet.
Sure, sure. So that's a really nice picture of kind of who you are, where you're from, and where you are right now. Normally, for the main part of the podcast, we kind of take a deep dive into a topic that you're really passionate about, or something that you just want to talk more about. What was it on your mind that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I when I looked at your sort of question
Mm,
prompts, well, the two things really for me are just the understanding how students learn,
mm,
and then the other one would be the concept of dialogical learning, and I'll get into that in a minute.
yeah, sure.
Um, but I've paid attention a lot to what Gabor Mate has said,
Mm,
and about the importance of, play and
yeah.
connection to nature in
Mm,
learning, and the importance of authentic, like validating authenticity and
mm,
attachment for students, well, for
yeah.
kids, right? So if you look at the first 5 years of a child's life, the formative years, you
Mm,
know, um, you look at the importance of attachment, right, for safety and security, and
mm,
then being able to be your authentic self. Because what I didn't realize until I've learned all this was that I have seen into the, like, I can look into the eyes of any student or any
mm,
human being.
mm,
It's just easier with students because they're still receptive and open. A lot of adults are shut down, right? So,
mm, mm, mm,
it's whatever. But the fact is that with students, I just, when you get to know them, like their true
mm,
strengths, passions, and interests, like they come flying out of them. And so I've always, for example, been so impressed with kindergarten teachers, because there's no way
mm.
in heck that I could ever be a kindergarten
Oh,
teacher.
absolutely. Same
But
here. Same here.
like, but it's remarkable because I've watched some masterful kindergarten teachers, and just that concept of play and all the stuff that they bring out of it. It's just like,
Mm,
so just watching the start of that, and then how it ends up. So when, students leave my grade 12 classroom, and just there's some disconnects there,
mm,
and
mm,
so what happened to those happy, thriving, excited to learn little
mm,
kids,
mm,
and what's happening in grade 12 when there's so much fear and shame if you're not like masterful in a certain subject. And, like I just have so many ideas and visions for restructuring that could possibly happen that really aren't impossible funding wise to do. But so I think I look at how do we keep kids engaged in their learning? Because
mm,
I am a nerd and I
mm,
freaking love to learn. And I'm,
mm,
I'm so
mm.
I'm so transparent with my students. Like I'm like, I'm a nerd. Like I'm always trying to make learning cool, trying
Yep.
to be very transparent about making mistakes. And like my students will tell you, like I laugh at myself all the time when they point things out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally missed that. But thank you. That's brilliant that you're bringing this to my attention. That's brilliant. And,
Yeah.
it's like, do you see, like, learning is messy. So
Yep.
it's that idea of creating safety and real life engagement to keep the passion for learning alive, because that's what our
Mm,
world needs. We are born to create and to design. And I just really try to encourage and bring a lot of activities into my classrooms where that opportunity exists. So that's a
mm-hmm.
real passion of mine, because when kids can like tap into their own creativity, like no matter what subject, because sometimes like, well, as a teacher, like our curriculums, but we're bound by them. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's a real stretch on how to get something of that's really not so relevant anymore, how to make that
Yeah. Yeah.
engaging and learning, right?
Very true. Yep.
So that's a real focus of mine. And then the other one is I was a literacy coach for my previous school division, and I had the opportunity to learn so much and to be exposed to incredible professional development opportunities before funding cuts.
Mm,
Anyways,
mm,
when I was mentoring and working with one of the teachers who now is a coach herself, she really introduced to me. She was doing her master's,
mm.
and her focus was on dialogical learning. And I was like,
Yep.
what? And it is the number one teaching tool that
Mm,
I believe in any subject is
mm.
the winner. And so I've actually worked with teachers who teach high school biology
Yep.
or like middle school mathematics. I've like worked with an array of teachers and taught them this idea of dialogical learning. And in a nutshell, what it's about is really you're teaching students how to deeply listen to each other,
Mm,
and you're teaching them how to talk. Because in our social media world, when students are perhaps less engaged socially than they ever have
mm,
been,
mm, mm.
it is a brilliant way to bring in human connection and then create this synergy of
Mm.
learning that is mind blowing while keeping the sage off the stage,
Yep.
right? So that it's not about me. It's about the fact that they are so involved in their learning. And often once you've masterfully taught it, and it's not even hard,
Yep.
you can just sit back and your students are just running the whole show, and it's mind blowing. And so really there's three kind of components to dialogical learning. You're
Mm.
teaching students like the skill of uptake, so that, for
Okay.
example, if I ask a question, or if I have an essential question or an essential outcome or objective, whatever people call it in their teaching curriculums, um, you're looking at that. But when students are asking a question, you can't just answer it and move on. So the
Mm.
idea of uptake is that you're asking me questions today, Alan,
Yep.
and you've followed through and asked me some more
Mm.
questions.
Mm.
And instead of just being like, oh, okay, so where were you born? Okay, good, and move on. So you even, for example, said, well, did you have any obstacles before teaching? What were you,
Mm. Mm.
you
Yep.
asked me some further questions so that it kind of brought in a bigger picture to our story. And then the other part is balance. So you're
Mm.
working in groups, and typically groups of 5 to 6 is perfect. I've done it with 3 and 4,
Yep.
but they originally have these sort of talk tickets, and they actually every time they talk they have to everybody has like the
Oh
same
yeah, I've
amount of
seen that. Yeah.
tickets,
Mm,
right?
mm,
Yeah,
mm,
so
mm.
that let's say we all have 5 tickets. And so that's fine if me, like I'm a talker, obviously, I'm a teacher. And so like so I use my 5 tickets quickly, rapidly, and then I can't talk anymore. So then what happens is students go, oh, because typically in our classrooms, we validate those who put their hands up first, the students who always can answer quickly, right? And so then it just sort of teaches other students, well, I'm opting out because I don't know and I can't think that fast, or I need processing time, or I have nothing to contribute, because the quickest and fastest usually get the most attention.
Yeah, definitely.
So what it does is it invites students to follow that process of uptake. So then perhaps me, who loves to talk and could run through my tickets really quickly, I would say, okay, I'm going to use this ticket and I'm going to start just asking you questions, Alan. I'm going to explore your thinking and get into this conversation. And I'm going to invite somebody else into the conversation. And so now the shy, quiet student is being invited into the conversation.
Yeah.
And what this all does is it also slows everything down, right? Because when I ask you a question and you're like a shy, quiet student, well, now I'm like not sure, and I'm like, and so and students start to be encouraging. Well, so like, like, where did you get this idea from, or why do you think that, or what happened, or and it just starts to connect students. And then the final kind of scenario to all of this is that it has to be valid. So you have to use evidence. So let's say we were talking about like the Indian Act in Canada, right? And we look at our truth and reconciliation and, Canada's horrible history. And we talk about some of these really heavy topics, right? But so I can, have my opinion that I may have heard from at home or have seen on a social media post, but I have to bring that evidence. And then these students through uptake are exploring that. Well, so, okay, but so where did you find that out? Or what did they say? And well, I read this and I heard this. And it is a conversation rooted in knowledge and evidence. And what it propels students to do is that they're always given the questions beforehand. This is not a like go in and stress and sweat it out, but you're given the questions beforehand. The idea, well, they're actually called like fish bowls. So you have these students who sit in the middle of the classroom, they have the questions, they have come in with their own evidence. But what's fascinating is the other students are sitting around and listening, and they're deeply listening, because what happens is even if every group has the same questions, which they do on that topic, no conversations ever end up the same way.
Wow.
It is absolutely exciting and fascinating what students then end up co-creating. So the power, the empowerment of the students in their own learning, and I'm just the teacher assessing with my 3 criteria: evidence, balance, and uptake. And there's a rubric, your 4 levels of blah, 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 so that there can be descriptive feedback. And I'm paying attention. But the conversations are unbelievable. And often when I first start doing it with a new group, they're like, well, how long do these have to be? I was like, they're organic. When you have nothing left to talk about, the conversation is ended, and you just move, and somebody can go, okay, well, let's move on to the next question. Well, I have giggled, because I've had students, we've had 2 classes, 2 full hours on one conversation.
Wow. They were that
And it's
engaged,
not
right?
a waste of time, because now they're exploring deeply. And the learning is so relevant because they're doing it, not me. So that's really, I credit that to one of the coaches that I worked with, because that's a life-changing approach. And especially like in light of social media and phones and social anxiety and depression. And, I've watched the quietest, most insecure students learn to participate. And everybody is it slows everything down. People are now listening, because if you're going to participate in uptake, you can't just sit there and be waiting to get in and talk next, right? Because then your ticket's used up and you're out of the conversation. So it just changes
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah.
So that's a real winner for me.
No, thanks for sharing that with us. It sounds fascinating, and I think it really encourages deep learning, like you said, and also it encourages students to be curious as well, right? Because they're almost encouraged to ask questions to one another rather than, oh, often like when we have discussions, it's sometimes I'm just waiting for my turn to just say whatever I wanted to say, right? But it seems like within this dialogical learning, they're much more listening to what the other people are saying, asking further questions to help them to further elaborate and to go deep within the idea. So it sounds fascinating. My big question would be, what do you think is stopping more teachers from doing this?
I'm just thinking it's awareness. Like I will tell you,
Mm,
until
mm,
this is eight, I think this is 8 or 9 years ago where I learned this, and I use it all the time. And kids of all ages, because I've done it in middle school. You can do it
yep.
in elementary school because again, there's prompts for everything, for uptake prompts. For example, you're providing a list of questions that kids could use. They could, like, if
Mm,
they're like, you're providing all the opportunities. Or
sure.
like, we do, there's activities to practice balance, or like there's prompts about what
Mm,
evidence, like
mm,
how you want to like research and collect your evidence. So it's
yep.
all very scaffolded. It's not like, oh, just go
Sure.
figure this out. um I just wonder, like, I think to myself, I had no idea. I never came in all my education and my
Yep.
professional
Yep.
development, I never came across it. I didn't learn it in university. And so like this one connection with this teacher that I was quote unquote
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
mentoring,
Yep.
and she mentored me, right?
Yeah.
Phenomenally.
Absolutely.
It was phenomenal. So I just think it's an awareness thing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Simone. Would you say that if teachers wanted to find out more about it, they could just Google it, like just literally type in dialogical learning and they can find it? Or is there an association or a particular website that you would recommend?
Well, that's actually interesting. I bet you could, because, well, see, all of my information has come from this one coach who
Yep.
did her master's degree on it, and I actually read her thesis. And
Oh,
so
interesting. Yeah.
her thesis was all in dialogical learning. So there were obviously lots of Google links. Like
Yep.
there's a lot of
Yep.
research out there that she incorporated in her thesis, right? So I
Mm,
think
mm,
that yes, I've never personally done it because I had the privilege of
mm.
having it all handed to me. And then the two of us really, we developed curricula
Yep.
like packets for our teachers that
Mm,
were like
mm.
literally, you did not have to think. You could be like, on day one, here are the materials you need, and this is what you need to do to
Sure.
scaffold this lesson. And we took them all the way through, for grade
Mm.
7, 8, and 9 at that time. But then you
Hmm.
can absolutely do that in every subject and every grade, which I've worked with teachers to do.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Brilliant, brilliant. I think it's such a great idea. Right. Are
Thank you.
you ready to move on to some quick fire questions?
Sure, go.
So, how would your students describe you, or how did your students describe you?
I'm positive that my students would
Mm,
describe me as eccentric, quirky,
mm.
loving, and just very open and honest.
Yeah.
I
Thank
just
you. Mm,
I think that this has been sort of my trademark my entire career.
mm, mm,
And it
mm,
started my first year of teaching, but I've given my students, they all get nicknames. So every year I have
mm.
a theme. So my first year of teaching in Toronto, they were called my fruits, right? So like I'd be like, hey,
Oh,
you're my
interesting.
cherry, you're my peach, whatever. And so then I've had my butterfly years. So then everybody's got a butterfly name, or my fish years, everybody's got a fish. And
Oh,
like,
that's funny.
and they're all,
That's really
and
funny.
so then when it first happens, because I've taught in three, provinces, when
Yeah.
I first start, people are like, God, that teacher's crazy. She's weird. But what I do, I always tell them, I need some time to get your name, because I need to get my vibe. I have to feel the vibe. So,
Mm,
I'm like, okay, so I had my years ago, I had my rocks and minerals. So, I'm like, oh, okay, she's my diamond. She's a diamond in the rough.
mm,
So she's a
mm.
diamond. He's my lapis lazuli, because but I get all the vibes of who they are, and I'll be like, oh, he's my fool's gold because he's my ding dong. You know what I'm saying?
That's wonderful.
And
And
so
it's a great
and
way
but
to
they
teach
love it.
metaphors as well, right?
Totally. Oh, I never thought of that, Ellen. I love that.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm.
absolutely. There's so much metaphor. And so it started to become really funny, because as I established a reputation everywhere, the students would be like, oh, what's my name? What's my name? I want my name. I'm like, well,
It's like,
I have to get to know you. I can't just come up with a name. I got to
that's
figure this
amazing.
out. This is this year's theme. And so
Yeah.
then I've giggled because I've been at, out in public or run into students some that I've taught, and they're like, well, why didn't we didn't get a name? I'm like, well, yeah, because you weren't my core class. I can't do it for
Mm,
everybody, but my core group every year has these
right.
nicknames.
Got it. Got it.
So, but it's a way to bond
Yeah,
affectionately,
absolutely. Absolutely.
lovingly,
Mm,
and it's been such a beautiful way, because when you have that, and when you're a shy kid especially, and you have a nickname and you're open to it, then eventually students just start to feel really safe and part of this weird,
yeah, 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 yeah.
creative,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
silly,
absolutely.
loving environment.
It makes you
Yeah,
want to try
so
it
I
out.
know. So I know how my students, what they think of me.
Yeah,
I do.
yeah, sure, sure. You kind of half answered this question already, but not fully. What would you be doing if you hadn't become a teacher?
Oh, I've thought of that. Well, two, I would. Oh, I always wanted to be like a horticulturalist. I remember when I went to the
Mm,
University of Toronto and the horticultural like campus or faculty.
mm,
I always thought, oh, I'd love to do that. And I know, but I'd love to be a philosopher.
mm, mm, mm. I think
I,
you make a
I've,
very
I've,
good one.
oh, thank you.
Mm, mm.
I've read thousands of books in my life. I'm
Yeah,
like perplexed and fascinated by the human condition
yeah,
and
life's
how
questions.
people learn. Yeah.
Mm,
So I guess
mm,
those would be my offshoots. But I'm right now a Jay Shetty certified life coach. So
mm,
that's where
mm.
I'm going now. So yeah.
Right, right. Do you want to take this opportunity to tell us a bit more about that? Because I mean, I was going to ask you other quick fire questions, but maybe I guess, do you want to tell us like what made you want to become a coach, or maybe your area of speciality, your niche, that kind of thing, before we wrap?
Sure. Well, okay, I've branded my niche as a sort of I'm going for wisdom coach because I'm
Mm,
52 years old.
mm,
I've transcended extreme trauma. I come from extreme trauma.
yeah.
And I've been able to transcend that through a lot of learning, growth, self-awareness. And so the idea, when I saw the whole Jay Shetty
Mm,
posts on Instagram,
mm,
um, I just felt called to it because I love Jay Shetty's vision
mm.
of making wisdom go viral for 1
Yeah,
million people.
yeah, yeah.
Because what I've seen in education and teaching and watching my students grow into adults is how much wisdom exists that we suppress and ignore.
Mm,
And
mm.
I have it, but I've never had the self-worth to claim it. And now I
Yeah.
have that self-worth. I've worked very hard on that.
Mm,
And the other part is I'm branding myself as a thought leader. I read
mm,
Jamie Karen Lima's Worthy.
mm.
And she talked about, and I'd never heard of that term, but this was in January or February when I read it.
Yeah.
And the idea of a thought leader, I'm like, I'm a thought leader. I'm a thinker. I think all the time. And that's also
Mm,
hence what I say, oh, I'd be interested in philosophy, right?
yeah.
Because in the microcosm of education, I have spent my 28 years studying and learning
Mm,
the flaws, the beautiful things, like, and teachers are remarkable because they make things work
yeah.
in almost impossible situations these days.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
So yeah, so I'm absolutely pursuing the whole life coaching, but I do know that I somehow do want to still I have all these plans and visions, but I do want to connect it to the idea of wisdom
Yeah. Yeah.
for humanity, but wisdom in for our students, because our students,
Mm,
right, when you're a kid and you have not been programmed
mm,
with the lies, the stupidity, the cowardice, right? When you have not been programmed with the fear, the shame, and the blame,
mm, mm,
that
mm.
wisdom exists. I've seen it. I see it in students.
Yeah.
Look at those
Yeah.
kids. It exists. And so, how do we get back to that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we
Definitely.
can. We can. We can do it differently.
Right. Are you almost like, as a wisdom coach, trying to help people find their hidden potential then, would you say?
Ooh, I love that. Yes, Alan. Absolutely. Because that is what I do as a teacher,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah,
and when I and the part of the reason for quitting was the overwhelm, right? So there was a point in time when I'm teaching 120 students a day because as COVID happened and and because of my ability to connect with students and I love to master subjects. I've taught like so many grades, I've taught
yeah.
like sciences, I've taught so many things and I always start out in fear and stress, but I love to master, right? Master that
Mm,
learning. And
mm,
so what started to happen is administration would ask me to teach classes instead of
mm,
and taking them away from other teachers that were not good at connecting with students
mm,
and were not perhaps good at like scaffolding. They might have been brilliant people, but they weren't good at, you know, like what I call mystery teaching, right? So the
mm,
mystery
mm,
teaching
mm,
is like, oh, you figure out what I want from you versus I like to
mm,
be very clear. Here's the criteria
mm,
for success and you will achieve success.
mm.
So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No,
Sorry,
that's
I don't,
brilliant.
yeah,
Yep, brilliant. Thank
okay.
you, Simone. And just to wrap, I just want to thank you for coming onto the podcast and, of course, for your authenticity. So throughout, I think you've talked about the importance of being authentic and how important that is to you. So I can feel your passion just through the screen right now. You are a lifelong learner, so I'm sure whatever path you take, you'll continue to inspire students, teachers, or whoever you come upon to enjoy and love learning as much as you do. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all your ideas today.
Thank you, Alan. I love that you're doing this. Can I ask you a question?
Oh yes, we only have a minute left, but of course, please do.
So, how did you come up with this idea? Because ordinary teachers and students, I love it because
Mm,
there's so much brilliance in the ordinary. So,
mm.
tell me, how did you come to this place?
Yeah, I mean, I feel I am an ordinary teacher myself. At the same time, I feel every teacher and every student has their own story to tell. And I think that the deepest form of learning is through stories and through other people's experiences. So that's the big goal of the podcast is to share these stories so that I mean, you might not connect with every story, but I'm sure there's one story there that you connect with that will really truly help you to learn something new or have a new insight. So yeah, that's it.
I think it's remarkable. What a brilliant creative idea. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much. I hope you can feel Simone's passion and how excited she was when talking about dialogical learning. And perhaps you're now also very excited about introducing this idea into your classroom. So, in essence, dialogical learning is creating a stage for students where they truly and deeply listen and talk to one another, because that's where all the deep learning happens. I've included in the show notes a link to a website and a blog where it describes in much more detail what dialogical learning is or teaching and how to implement it into your classroom. So I hope you enjoyed listening to Simone's extraordinary story, and please do join us again next time on Ordinary Teachers and Students.